keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching. Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. Yet another energy boss has expressed concern over a potential Labour government and its pledge to stop North Sea oil and gas licences, not to mention the taxes already being imposed on the industry. Is it time we put energy security ahead of the net zero agenda? The Windsor Framework, although hailed as a crystallisation of UK-EU post-Brexit relations, has ultimately failed in its most important intention, to restore power sharing in Northern Ireland. We'll be joined by the leader of the Democratic Unionist Party, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, as the Centre for Brexit Policy unveils new plans to tackle the problems posed by the protocol. And does indolence lead to illness? Seems working from home may be the prime culprit behind Britain's epidemic of long-term sickness. Work and Pension Secretary Mel Stride certainly seems to think so, as he pledges an expansion of schemes to get Britain back to work. And where next for Vladimir Putin? He has never looked weaker in his 23-year reign after his own private army invaded Russia unchallenged. We will be joined by former Government Minister Brooks Newmark, who has been working on the front line these past few months with the Ukrainian people. State of the Nation starts now. We'll also be joined by a particularly illuminating panel this evening, author and broadcaster Michael Crick and the criminal barrister and former Tory MP, Jerry Hayes. As ever, I want to hear from you. It's the most important part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now it's time for the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Jacob, thank you and good evening to you. Well, our top story on GB News tonight is that hospital consultants in England are to walk out next month in a dispute over pay. Members of the British Medical Association voted in favour of strikes on the 20th and 21st of July unless a credible offer was forthcoming from the government. Meanwhile, nurses' strikes have ended after a ballot for further industrial action failed to meet the legal 50% participation threshold. The Royal College of Nursing saying only 43% cast a vote in the ballot. The Health Secretary, though, says he is ready to work with nurses going forward.
We reached a deal with the NHS Staff Council that the majority of trade unions agreed to. I'm pleased that the RCN have now ended their industrial action, and we stand ready to work in partnership with the NHS Staff Council as a whole, but also with the RCN. There are a number of aspects of our deal with the Agenda for Change unions. We continue to work with them, and we stand ready to do so with the RCN.
Matt Hancock criticised the UK's strategic pandemic planning before COVID hit, saying it was completely wrong. The former Health Secretary told the COVID inquiry today that planning was focused on whether or not there were enough body bags rather than stopping the virus taking hold. He says it was a colossal failure to assume the spread of the virus couldn't be stopped, and he said he was profoundly sorry for every death caused. The inquest into Nicola Bulley's death today concluded the mother of two died from accidental drowning. Senior coroner Dr James Aidley told the inquest Nicola Bulley had fallen into the cold water and given no indication of any intention to take her own life. Miss Bulley disappeared in January whilst out walking her dog along the River Wyre. Her body was found 3 weeks later. Lancashire Police say they hope the inquiry will put an end to the ill-informed speculation which has been so damaging to Nikki's family. Now, in news away from home, the Belarusian president says the Wagner Group boss, Yevgeny Prigozhin, is now in Belarus. Alexander Lukashenko saying he'd previously offered the mercenary chief a relocation deal, helping to end Saturday's march on Moscow. Wagner troops were told they could either join the Russian army, move to Belarus with their leader, or return to their families. And that comes as the Kremlin says Vladimir Putin's position is not shaken by the attempted coup. Now, GB News picked up a series of Trick Awards today. GB News Breakfast won Multi-Channel News Programme of the Year, and Nigel Farage nabbed News Presenter of the Year. Stephen Dixon and Ellie Costello were evidently delighted at the news.
The public, they like what we do, and it feels so nice to be up against stiff competition, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like ITV, like BBC, and it's us that steps away with the gong. It feels amazing, doesn't it? It feels
You're
really,
drop
really
that
good.
in a minute.
I just love it. I just want to be like, yeah!
Congratulations to them. On TV, online, DAB+ radio and the TuneIn app. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, in a reform of Whitehall, divided up the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy when he took office. Kemi Badenoch became Business Secretary, while a new department was created for Energy, headed by Grant Shapps. The new department's title is the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero, which is almost a definition of an oxymoron. Today, yet another energy boss has come out raising the alarm bells, ringing the alarm bell, over the UK's reluctance to make use of its energy resources in the North Sea. The executive chairman of Ithaca, Gilad Myerson, has said that Labour's pledge to ban new oil and gas exploration, as well as current tax policy, is spooking investors. There is roughly 8 billion barrels worth of oil and gas in the North Sea, just including the resource that is within 30 miles of the existing infrastructure. It's 15 billion if you include the rest of it. So an enormous amount that is available potentially to be used within this country for our wealth to make us more prosperous. And that's before you get on to the 1,000 trillion cubic feet of shale gas resting under the UK. Another enormous resource of cheap energy that could reduce people's bills and help our economy grow. Is it any surprise that the chairman then went on to explain that the carbon footprint of domestically sourced energy is significantly lower and therefore an opportunity better than imported energy? It been admitted by the Climate Change Committee that domestic gas emits between 2 and 64 grams of carbon dioxide less than imported gas. That's because liquefied gas, LNG, has to be liquefied and then regasified, all of which uses energy, and that has emissions, and therefore the emissions are higher than if you use your own resources. Nonetheless, last year, in spite of all our own resources, we spent over £100 billion importing energy from the rest of the world. And that makes us reliant on potentially unstable regimes, but also leaves us dependent on renewables, which aren't necessarily reliable. The wind doesn't always blow. So you have unreliable foreign imports that may come from places like Russia, or may have done, or from unstable parts of the world, creating a greater carbon footprint, so not even being greener than using our own resources. Now, this shift in our energy policy from when the North Sea opened up in the 70s and the 80s is because of our pursuit of net zero, and it's left us with lower energy security. And it makes the cost of energy a hostage to geopolitical events, as we saw last year when the price of gas rocketed following the war in Ukraine. Compare this with America. In America, kilowatt hour of energy is 18 cents, compared to in the UK at 41 US cents. That's because it's energy independent, using its own domestic supplies, and it therefore suffered less than we did when Russia invaded Ukraine, and its inflation rate is lower. That makes people in the country better off. So the question is, are we going to use energy sourced from our own fossil fuels, or are we going to import them from other people? Because everyone knows we're going to be using fossil fuels for decades to come, and energy security is currently not compatible with net zero. In this transitional period, we really ought to make use of our own supplies. We need to focus on cheap energy and economic growth. No one will vote to be cold and poor. But of course, as always, I want to know what you think, mailmog@gbnews.com. But I'm now absolutely delighted to be joined by the Deputy Director of Offshore Energies UK, Michael Tholen, along with my brilliant panel, who you know, author and broadcaster Michael Crick, and the criminal barrister and former Tory MP, Jerry Hayes. Michael, I think I was quoting some of your figures, so thank you for those. But 15 billion barrels is an enormous quantity of resource. Surely any sensible government would be trying to get as much of this out as possible.
Well, we'd like to think both the current government and maybe future governments can also look at those opportunities. Perhaps I'd say we shouldn't just put energy security ahead of net zero. Energy security should be at the heart of net zero. We can actually do the two together, but we need to make the most of our heritage. The last 50 years, we've seen a huge engineering industry build up on the back of our oil and gas facilities, and that we'll need that to drive the transition. We'll need that to keep paying the bills here in the UK and providing the energy we need. Half of that comes from the North Sea already.
And to maintain the expertise that we've got. But your point on working towards net zero through our own supplies is absolutely right, because with our own supplies, as I mentioned, it's 2 to 64 grams per kilowatt hour less of carbon emissions if we use our own resources.
Very much. Homegrown energy has a huge amount to benefit the economy and the environment here in the UK. And the exciting thing is we can use that technology not just to provide the energy we need now, but to develop the skills for floating wind, to develop the skills and the capabilities that we can lead on carbon storage. All of those are going to be needed in the years to come, but they need the base load of work and the opportunities we have here already in the UK.
And if we have a strong and vibrant economy, then we can afford to invest in the energy developments, and this can be a variety of technologies. It may be hydrogen, as you say, it may be carbon capture and storage, it may be fusion, but you can invest in all these technologies because you've got a strong and prosperous economy which is built on cheap energy. And we know that if we look at the history of the last couple of 100 years.
Very much so, but I think building on that also, confidence for the long term. Energy policy is a long-term issue. You can't just simply, at one election to the next, hop and have a complete change of mind. It takes 5 years to develop a new oil and gas field, in some cases. It takes 10 or 15 years to develop a new nuclear facility. We need to see through the long term and work with the Climate Change Committee to get the right solutions long term based on what we can do.
Michael, you've been commenting on British politics for quite a long time. Why are we so poor at making long-term decisions?
Because it's a democracy and politicians...
But other democracies, the US is doing much better on this than we are.
But on the whole, I mean, it's one of the prices of democracy that politicians tend to think short term. And actually, on the whole, in America, they do too, where they re-elect their Congress every 2 years.
All democracies do.
Yeah,
That's the problem.
Yeah, and it's the price of democracy, and nobody's thought of a way around this. But clearly, we have to think long term. I mean, I'm not an energy expert. You clearly are, Mike, 1,000 times more than I will ever be. And if we can achieve net zero by the methods you say, with further investment and exploitation of our reserves in the North Sea and elsewhere around our waters, then great. But my suspicion is that we're trying to wriggle out of our commitments, and that once the extra investment is made, you'll then find more reserves, and we will weaken our commitments, and that net zero will not be achieved by this country. And we need to set an example.
Even if we can't achieve net zero, isn't it better to use our own resources than imported resources, which increase our carbon footprint, except on the mad calculations that are sometimes used?
Well, I think that goal is really, really important. We all have to do it. We are committed to it. And I think if a country is committed to a goal, if the world is, and most of the countries of the world are committed to a goal, they should try and stick by it instead of wriggling out of it here and wriggling out of it there. And and we should be putting lots of resources too into the new forms of energy that you've described, and into nuclear, of course. And people, you always make the point about renewables, the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow, but you'd also list hydrogen and fusion and all of the other possibilities, and nuclear. But in the long term, we should be getting away from carbon energy and into other forms of energy.
Jerry, we've got to stick to our commitments because we've made them.
We stick to our commitments, but not necessarily by the date. Because if ever we need energy security is now. Look at in Germany, they must be terrified of what's going on. Is there going to be a coup? We don't know. Who's going to take over? Is there going to be energy security in Europe? I doubt it. Therefore, I'm afraid we have to be realistic and protect our country by actually doing a bit of shale, digging in the North Sea. Starmer, let me just be a horrible politician for once. Look, Starmer's made a terrible error of judgment. Scotland could be his with the collapse of the SNP. Michael will correct me if I'm wrong, but it's something like 200,000 jobs in the North Sea. If we do not invest, so many of those jobs will go. I suspect he'll do a U-turn, but before the election, he may not. We've got to have secure energy. Fusion, great idea. But it's been a great idea for about 40 years. It hasn't happened yet. They haven't stabilised the whole thing. So, we have to be... we are politicians. We have to be realistic, and we have to protect the people of this country with secure energy.
And as Michael pointed out, we're a democracy, and no one will vote to be cold or poor. And therefore, if we try and be too ambitious about this and put the price of energy up even further when we are in the top three most expensive energy countries in the world, people will vote against it.
Well, we don't really know. There is a huge commitment, I think, amongst the British public to net zero as well.
Not according to The Sun last week. Remember, we dealt with that.
It was very low. It was very low down there.
60%.
60%. We're much more worried about prices.
Yeah. Well, but
I think this has transformed it, and I think this is the bit politicians.
When our weather continues to get worse, and our summers continue to get hotter, and the floods continue to get bigger, and all the dreadful things that have already started happening, I think public opinion will be saying, you lot, way back in 2023, you made this promise, and then you wriggled out of it, and now what you've landed us with. And I remember the other day we were talking on this programme about inheritance tax and the legacy that you leave to your children. And you were all in favour of getting rid of inheritance tax for that purpose. Well, what about the legacy you are leaving to your children and grandchildren and our children and grandchildren?
But not destitution, not energy poverty, not dying in cold.
And not this strange way of calculating things, say that when you bring in wood chips from Canada, they count as Canada's carbon emissions, not ours, and say that you pretend that there's no emission from burning wood chips. It's just bonkers.
It's like indulgences, isn't it?
Well, no, I'm quite in favour of indulgences, so that's another discussion that we may have.
We indulge you.
That's very good.
But if overall Canada and Britain have reduced their carbon emissions by this method, then sure, that's fine. I mean, there will always be strange, fiddles and so on. But the overall goal is there to be achieved. We committed to it, and if we're going to renege on it, then the whole of the rest of the world.
I'm going to allow Michael final word.
I'd be very nervous to say we're reneging. Quite the reverse. The oil and gas industry in the UK is fundamentally committed to it.
Good.
But even in 2050, we will need to provide about 20% of our energy from gas and oil because use it in a low-carbon way, because we're going to need it for power stations, for industry, for medicines, for pharmaceuticals.
Great.
So 2030 is not achievable. That's what you're saying.
No,
you think so? But you said 2050.
But even 2050,
we will still need oil and gas.
Even in a net zero world.
Yeah.
If you're genuine,
and we're going to have to move on, I'm afraid. But thank you to Michael and to my panel. Don't forget to let me know what you think. mailmog@gbnews.uk. Coming up, the Windsor Framework failed in its mission to restore power sharing in Northern Ireland. DUP leader Sir Geoffrey Donaldson has a solution. Also, Brooks Newmark is here to report to you fresh from the front lines of Ukraine.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Anne, hi Jacob. Most of the electorate did not vote for net zero. It's madness to continue down this route. We need to be energy secure. Fracking is the answer. Robert, please do not forget the estimated minimum of 23 trillion tonnes of coal under the North Sea. That's a good point, Robert, though Gladstone Thought we'd run out of coal in 1966, which we seem not to do. Steve, do we have any choice with the current and future governments heading towards net zero at any cost? And David, why don't we concentrate on reducing consumption of oil and gas rather than reducing production? Net zero doesn't solve the problem. Back in February, when State of the Nation launched, the Prime Minister unveiled the Windsor Framework, supposedly the final stage of Brexit negotiations over the Northern Ireland Protocol, which purported to crystallise Brexit Britain's trade arrangements with the EU. Its stated priority was to bring back power sharing to Northern Ireland, the crucial element in a post-Belfast agreement Northern Ireland. And while it was hailed as an impressive agreement and sailed through Parliament, it's not done what it was intended to do. Power sharing has not returned to Northern Ireland and the gridlock persists. Well, just today, at the Centre for Brexit Policy, a new plan was drawn up by a number of leading pro-Brexit figures to solve many of these issues the people of Northern Ireland continue to face as a result of the framework. And I'm now joined by one of those figures, indeed, I think it's fair to say, the most distinguished of those figures. It's Geoffrey Donaldson, the leader of the Democratic Unionist Party. So, Geoffrey, first of all, thank you very much for coming on. The Windsor Framework has left many problems with a border in the Irish Sea and different terms of trade in Northern Ireland and in Great Britain, even though we are a United Kingdom. What's your solution to the problem?
Well, it's good to be back, Jacob, and congratulations to GB News on winning the awards today. I think that's good news for the station. In terms of Northern Ireland and the Windsor Framework, we have considered very carefully what is in this framework. We've consulted widely within Northern Ireland, talked to businesses, talked to consumers, talked to people in the political realm, and it's clear to us that the Windsor Framework doesn't adequately resolve all of the problems created by the Northern Ireland Protocol. So we continue to have concerns. We have put further proposals to the government on how those concerns can be addressed, and we're waiting on them to respond. In the meantime, as you say, unfortunately, we don't have a fully functioning government in Northern Ireland. We want to get Stormont back up and running, but it has to be on a sound foundation, and that means resolving the issues related to the protocol.
When you're talking to the government, is the government listening at this stage?
In fairness, I think they are. Many of the issues that we have relate to how the UK government manages the internal market of the United Kingdom. And that's important because many of our problems arise from the fact that Northern Ireland continues to be subject to EU law across over 300 areas of law, mainly on the manufacture of goods in Northern Ireland. And that has created difficulties for us in our ability to trade with our biggest market, which, of course, is the United Kingdom.
Is the United Kingdom. And the solution you've come up with is one of mutual enforcement, so that if you were a company that wanted to trade with the European Union and you were anywhere in the United Kingdom, you would have to follow their laws, and it would be an offence under UK law to export something to the EU that didn't meet the EU's rules.
Well, we welcome the publication of this report today by the Centre for Brexit Policy. It's not our report, it is their report. Nevertheless, I think it is well researched, well argued, and I think has the potential to offer a longer-term solution to the problems that were created by the Northern Ireland Protocol. In the short term, we're addressing the issues related to the Windsor Framework, but I think the government should examine this report, the recommendations made, and in the context of their ongoing engagement with the EU, I think this offers a potential longer-term solution.
Because the Windsor Framework was hailed as being the final statement, but it isn't really, is it? There are further discussions to be had, and the implementation of it is to a significant degree at the discretion of the European Union.
Well, indeed. I mean, the Windsor Framework, by its own admission, does not address and resolve all of the problems created by the protocol. For example, on veterinary medicines, we don't have a long-term agreement here. We've had a further 3-year grace period, as they call it, whilst these issues are resolved. So there's still a lot of matters, Jacob, that are fundamentally important to the economy of Northern Ireland that need to be resolved. And I think that opens the opportunity for the government in those continuing negotiations to look at, well, what can we do for the longer term to settle this issue once and for all?
And in terms of your return to power sharing, is that still dependent on the tests that you laid out being met under the Windsor Framework and the further negotiations?
Well, we've put proposals to the government about the concerns we have in relation to the Windsor framework. We're waiting for them to come back. Those proposals relate, for example, to protecting Northern Ireland's place within the internal market of the UK. In essence, what our proposals do is to seek to ensure that what the Prime Minister said the Windsor framework would do in terms of resolving these issues, that in fact that is what it does.
And do you actually want to go back into power sharing? Because some people say that the DUP just doesn't want to be in power sharing where Sinn Féin is the lead party. Or are you willing to go back as long as these conditions are met?
Well, of course, the position of First Minister and Deputy First Minister in Northern Ireland are co-equal. But in terms of our position on Stormont, we are a devolutionist party. We want to see Stormont back up and running. We will nominate ministers to the executive when we have seen the progress that is required to enable the restoration of our devolved government.
And so you're talking about progress rather than necessarily getting everything you want in the principles that you laid down, or do you need all of those points to be answered?
Well, we are very clear. We need, as a bottom line, to see Northern Ireland's position within the internal market of the United Kingdom properly protected, both in law and in practice.
And it may have perverse consequences because the Windsor framework was derived to stop the single market of the EU being undermined, whereas actually Northern Ireland could find itself challenging UK policy. If you take the ban on petrol motors, we may all be coming over to Northern Ireland between 2030 and 2035 with an absolute boon for the motor retail trade in Northern Ireland to buy petrol cars from you.
I never cease to be amazed, Jacob, at the ironies that are thrown up by these proposed arrangements. Look, we recognise that in Northern Ireland there is a distinct situation. We share an island with an EU member state. We want to continue trading with that member state. But it is fundamentally important that the arrangements to facilitate that do not get in the way of our ability to trade with the rest of the UK.
And that we are a united kingdom and that Northern Ireland is just as much part of the United Kingdom as Somerset is.
Well, and when you consider that in Northern Ireland, of the £77 billion worth of goods we manufacture every year, 8 billion are sold to the EU, 65 billion is sold in the United Kingdom. And that demonstrates clearly where our biggest market is. It's the UK internal market.
And the thing that's always puzzled me from the very early point of discussion of this is actually the EU's problem. Why are we trying to solve their problem? Why don't we just say to them, if you have a problem with the situation in Northern Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, you sort it out?
Well, I think the UK government and unionism has tried to be responsible about this. We've tried to reach agreed outcomes. But even the Irish Prime Minister, the Taoiseach, has acknowledged that the Northern Ireland Protocol represented a significant overreach by the EU. And I think we do want to see a sense of balance and perspective here. And as I have said, the trade figures are very revealing. They show that we trade far more within the UK than we do with the EU. So it's important there is a sense of proportion in terms of the solutions that are brought forward, and that's what we need.
Well, Geoffrey, you were one of my earliest guests. You're always welcome to come back on. Thank you very much. I think mutual enforcement is a very good idea. Coming up, does idling at home make you ill? And a report from the Ukrainian front line.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Welcome back. I remain Jacob Rees-Mogg, and you've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Mark, yes to cleaner air, but not at the expense of energy security. Why is this country only installing infrastructure for electric vehicles? Hydrogen is the better way forward. So let's have infrastructure to fuel these cars. And Bob, as a retired engineer, I have to say every conceivable piece of equipment that has moving parts, be it office furniture to rotating electrical car motors, needs oil. We need oil. And John on Northern Ireland says the answer is to implement a proper international border. Scrap all the devolution nonsense. The great epidemic that has hit post-COVID Britain is long-term illness. Roughly 2.5 million people in the UK are not working owing to long-term illness, an increase of 400,000 since the pandemic. And perhaps more worryingly, the cost of working age benefits is projected to reach £25 billion by 2028. Work and Pension Secretary Mel Stride has a hunch. And it's not just the hunchback of a worker from home. Mr. Stride believes that the sharp rise in long-term illness could be caused by physical strain of uncomfortable desks and working conditions. The reversal of this trend is now a prime focus for His Majesty's government, and schemes to get people with long-term illness off benefits and back to work are being pushed. I hate to say I told you so. I did have my doubts about working from home being such a panacea, but back with me on my panel, author and broadcaster Michael Crick and the criminal barrister and former Tory MP Jerry Hayes. Michael, is working from home making people ill? Does being idle make you depressed and ill?
Ooh, I doubt it. I mean, OK, there probably are people working at home who haven't got their chairs at the right height or the wrong kind of chair, but frankly, there are probably a lot of people in offices who are in the same situation. I think it's very difficult to set out hard and fast rules on this. Part of me says that, I mean, as a journalist, you go in the office, creativity, you work in a group, ideas spark off each other. On the other hand, offices can also waste a lot of time because people sit around gossiping and, what do you think of the game? What do you think of the match on Saturday or whatever? And and there are certain jobs which require, say, a lot of reading, which actually peace and quiet at home is what you need. So it's very difficult to set out rules.
OK, but it does seem that the biggest rise in ill health is mental health. And isn't it fair to assume that actually being in a community, being in a group, is better for your mental health, that man is a political, social animal?
Perhaps, but maybe being at home, partly with your family, well, maybe, in some cases, it may well be if you're with your family, that makes your mental health worse or better. Who knows? And I think a lot of the mental health problems may have arisen because of that COVID period and the strains of all of that, and it was a very abnormal for us as human beings. But I mean, I think Mel Stride is quite right to actually look at this and work it all out. And of course, the big problem is the huge waiting lists for people to have operations, which are stopping them having the operations and getting back to work.
Jerry, you're pretty social. You must find it hard if you had to work from home. Did you find lockdown pretty difficult?
No, I loved it. I live in a beautiful village, and my wife and I went for walks, which we hadn't done for years, and I was able to do more work as a barrister remotely than I could. Well, not trials, obviously. However, there's a number of issues here. This reeks of a civil servant report, which hasn't been properly thought out. I remember my first day as a very junior, lowly bag carrier in the Department of Environment with John Gunner. The chiefs, obviously, the permanent secretary says, oh, we've got a report here, and it says the majority of people who fall to the ground through windows, the windows have been opened. Now, that cost us, in 1993, £50,000. Look, people want to work from home, it's great, as long as it works for them and as long as it works for their employers.
But I think Michael's point's a really important one. It's actually getting people seen so that if they need help, they get it. Because actually, the delays in mental health support are extremely long. And I get this as a constituency MP, people getting in touch with me saying that they're meant to have an appointment, but that it's so far into the future.
It's always been like that. It was like that in the 80s, particularly for teenagers. Teenagers are the ones who really suffered. School children have really suffered. But it must be between the... You know, you don't believe in the nanny state, and neither do I. Why should we say you must go into work? It must be up to the individual. It must be up to the employer.
Employers have the right to say you must come into work.
Yes, of course.
And there are some jobs where you can't really do it from home.
Not a train job.
And there are other benefits as well. The actual journey to work, the journey to work cause you to walk to the bus stop or the station or wherever, or to the factory, and on the other hand, you may end up on a crowded train, and that can't do you much good. So there are all sorts of pluses and minuses.
But we are social animals.
We are.
So it's a good thing to be with others.
I absolutely agree that businesses have a right to decide whether their employees go in or not, and it's a negotiation, and the state has a right to demand that public servants go into work. But the government does have an interest in making sure that people aren't getting out-of-work benefits who could be able to go to work and could have better health if certain steps were taken. That must be an interest of the DWP, a fair enough interest.
Yes. And what is our biggest problem in this country? Productivity. And why do we have low productivity? We have low productivity because of lack of proper skill training. Now, this has been going on for years. I used to advise, believe it or not, Margaret Thatcher in 1975 on this. In 1975, we were banging on about skill training. We still haven't done it.
Well, we were banging on about vocational education in the 1890s, and we wondered why the Germans were getting ahead of us. But that's a modern note.
But that was children up the chimneys. Children up the chimneys.
Children up the chimneys, I think, ends in the 18th century. So we're slightly taking a detour. But that the productivity issue is a fundamental one.
It is.
And we've been trying, and this ties back to immigration, as we so often come back to, because we have taken mass migration at low wages to try and fill the productivity gap rather than investing in automation.
I mean, Harold Wilson actually set up a government department for calling it the Department of Employment and Productivity. When was that? 64, round about then.
And he set up the Department for Peace and Disarmament, didn't he?
Well, we did.
Well, and we had the Department for Prices and Incomes, which we may
was a complete
be going back to.
No, that would be a total disaster.
So to come back to where we started, we agree that this is a perfectly reasonable thing for the government to be doing, to be encouraging people to focus on their health, to get back to work if they can. It's a very big bill that falls on taxpayers. And there does seem to be some evidence that the effects of the lockdown and working from home have given people a degree of mental health problem that needs to be tackled.
But one thing business wants, and you as business secretary would have known, I know I suspect you disagree with it, childcare. We've got to have childcare. Women want to go out to work.
Yes, but we've got a ridiculous system with childcare where you can pay anybody to do it other than people who are actually related to the child.
They can't.
You can.
No.
The government's introduced huge subsidies, but if you actually happen to be related to the child, you can't get any benefit.
The other thing I worry about is that we're moving to a world where everybody will just sort of you know, lounge on their sofa at home with their mobile phones and their laptops and their computers and their tellies, that their bodies will wither, their limbs will wither, they will live off deliveries all the time, be it of food or stuff from Amazon, and that the
other delivery services do exist. This is a most dystopian view where you will have a small head on a very large body that's unable to move. I don't think that will happen. I'm more optimistic than that, but then I'm a Conservative. Thank you to my panel. We'll see the panel next week. Coming up, is this the beginning of the end for Vlad the Bad? Brooks Newmark is here, fresh from the front lines of the conflict in Ukraine.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything, I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point.
And action.
Sergeant Reed, my superstar panel, they're already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News. Britain's watching.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I continue to identify as Jacob Rees-Mogg, and you've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Andrew, indoor air quality at home is generally poorer than in the office. I'm not sure why that is, but never mind, that's what Andrew thinks. The more time spent at home, the bigger the health impact. Daniel, I hate working from home. I can't get through to companies when I call. No one's ever in their offices, and I'm not allowed their home telephone numbers. Yes, that's something that's been a great frustration for people trying to get public services that they cannot get through. HMRC has been particularly weak recently. And Jill, I'm waiting for idleitis to appear in the next medical journal. Well, if it doesn't appear in the journal, it will be in a song. Idleitis too, wouldn't you? Anyway, last night we discussed events in Russia over the weekend and that they've marked a new chapter in the conflict. President Vladimir Putin has never looked weaker in his 23-year reign after his private mercenary army, led by Yevgeny Prigozhin, invaded Russia on Friday evening. Just last night, in what appeared to be something of a backtrack, Putin vowed to bring the mutiny leaders to justice. Prigozhin now resides in exile in Belarus. Meanwhile, the Ukrainians have taken advantage of the tumult, and a counter-offensive in Bakhmut and further east in the Donbass is underway. Earlier today, the Ministry of Defence confirmed that Ukrainian forces were highly likely to have recaptured land lost in 2014. So do these developments spell good news for the Ukrainians and their hopes for territorial integrity and sovereignty? Well, who better to have with me than former Government Minister Brooks Newmark, fresh from Ukraine and from the front line. Brooks, what is your interpretation of what's happened over the weekend? Where do you think it goes from here? Is this actually a turning point for Ukraine in its favour, or could things become more difficult?
Well, I think we have to unpack two things, what's going on in Ukraine versus what's going on in Russia. I think until the point where we knew where Prigozhin was going to end up, people were coming to various conclusions. But unfortunately, if you draw a picture with only the dots that you can see, you may come up with the wrong picture. As the invisible dots start emerging, another picture comes through. And I thought if Prigozhin ended up in Africa, where he makes most of his money, then he really was in exile. The fact that he's now parked in Belarus is not good for NATO's effectively northeastern flank. So the Baltic states are very worried in particular. But I'd also be worried that Putin may have done a deal where he says, look, you want to earn your stripes back, your goodwill back. I need somebody to put pressure on the north part of Ukraine, because unfortunately Lukashenko's soldiers will not fight. They will not join the Russian soldiers. So as a proxy, again, a proxy army, or Wagner may well still be in business, but putting pressure on the north, which is quite close to Kyiv, as we know.
Are you saying that Prigozhin could get the Belarusian troops to be a threat to Ukraine?
No.
No.
Not the Belarusian troops, his own troops.
His own troops. But his own troops are elsewhere, aren't they? They haven't followed him into Belarus.
No, he's taken a group of a cadre with him there. And there are some, although I think probably very few, have been merged into the greater Russian army.
OK, but I thought rather than 25,000 initially advertised, it was only 8,000 who he had with him. So it's not a huge number.
It's a big enough number
to put pressure on.
Put pressure on, yeah.
So
and by the way, there still may be, because they're generally can be quite well paid, the Wagner soldiers, there may well be more join them.
So you think this could actually be a risk for Ukraine?
Yeah.
And that, do you think it's all been organised, or do you think that Prigozhin followed through where he went, Putin reacted, and now Putin is saying this is a deal, or did Prigozhin do it as a diversion in the first place to create an unexpected...
No, I don't think so. I don't think it was deliberate. I think Prigozhin was generally very angry because Shoigu he felt was constantly undermining him by not giving him
Russian defense
enough ammunition. So sometimes a cigar is a cigar, and I think Prigozhin is short-tempered, used to getting his own way, and I think much to a lot of people's surprise, walked into Rostov-on-Don, which is where the Southern Command is, and took over, and people there effectively welcomed him.
Yes.
Now, Voronezh, where he moved to, which is sort of halfway between, it wasn't quite the case. And I think at that point, Putin then called his bluff. And I think that, the Spetsnaz alone, which is the special forces within the Russians, outnumber Wagner by 10 to 1. I mean, he was not going to win that war, but Putin didn't want to be seen to be, which is what he may have had to do, bomb Russian soldiers in Russian land. So I suspect there was some deal drawn up whereby they both drew stumps, and I think that the Wagner group has now parked itself in Belarus, which isn't necessarily good news.
Good news for Ukraine.
And probably not necessarily good news for Lukashenko, but he may not realise that yet.
Now, you've been in Ukraine, you've been helping thousands of people to get away from the fighting, you've been rescuing them, providing humanitarian aid. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I sort of went in at the beginning of the war, really, just for a few days to help a friend of mine on the border. And then I realised when people were coming out that there are a lot of unscrupulous people charging people money to take them to safety. So I went in with 3 buses and started moving people away from Kyiv. And then when the Russians were pushed out, I moved south towards Mariupol, started evacuating women and children from there, trying to get away from Mariupol, mainly from Zaporizhia, and then ended up in the east. And over those 6 months while I was in Kharkiv, moving people away from Sloviansk and Kramatorsk, and we heard today Kramatorsk was bombed again. I moved about 11,000 women and children away from there to the west of the country. And by the end of the year, I'd moved about 32,000 women and children to the west part of the country.
And sometimes you've been moving them from pretty hot zones.
Yes, yes. I think the problem with the big charities is because of all the health and safety and everything else, there's an unwillingness to risk effectively life. So
tell my viewers what you told me when we had dinner about you were getting the buses out when you were pretty much under fire, because it's an extraordinary... I know you may be too modest to tell it on live TV, but you were so brave, and the people you were taking out were at risk.
I think that was last July when I had organised to move 1,000 mainly elderly people and some women, not many children, from the Russian side to the Ukrainian side across a checkpoint. And the night before, the Ukrainians were worried. So in the 500 metres between the 2 checkpoints, they'd laid mines. And so I thought, bucket this, I've come all this way. I'm going to get them to move the mines or to create a path through the mines. So 6:30 in the evening, before I'm going, I was told, sorry, it's off. And I say, no, it's not off. I'm turning up tomorrow at 7:45, like we agreed, and I want the mines moved. And I've got to say, so then we all went. It's about a 25-kilometre ride. And I set the buses off ahead of me, about 20 buses. And I was following, and then I heard this massive bang, and I thought we had a flat tyre. But then my driver said, no, that was a mortar shell landed 70 metres behind us. And then, we did. On that day, we moved out 1,015 women and elderly people through a minefield over 500 metres, which I'd got the soldiers. Believe it or not, they actually moved them because they're anti-tank mines. Your viewers might not know this, are much bigger than anti-personnel mines. So you can actually flick a switch and move them.
Well, I think this is amazingly heroic, and I quite understand why the big charities don't allow their employees to do it. Thank you, Brooks. People can go to ukraineangels.org to find out more. But that's all from me. Up next, it's the great Professor Daniel Wootton. Dan, what's on your menu tonight?
Jacob, we've got a load of brilliant guests on the way. Megyn Kelly beaming over live from the US. Nigel Farage on his big victory against the TV establishment today. And also Tom Bauer with a major royal revelation.
Oh, that sounds very exciting. You've always got royal revelations. You must be very well connected. Anyway, that's coming up after the weather. I'll be back tomorrow night from 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation. The weather's bound to be wonderful in Somerset. But actually, tomorrow I'm going to be at Lord's.
Evening, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Quite a warm, humid night tonight, and that'll still be around tomorrow, though it will turn fresher later in the northwest behind this cold front, which is slowly heading in at the moment. But these weather fronts have been bringing quite a bit of rain across the country through the day today. It's still pretty damp out there this evening over eastern England, Scotland, northern England and Northern Ireland. The rain tending to head out into the North Sea, many places becoming dry. Certainly haven't seen much rain again across the south through the day today, and overnight it stays dry, predominantly cloudy, a bit misty and murky in places, and quite warm and humid, temperatures holding up at 16 or 17 Celsius in most urban areas. So a pretty warm, pretty sticky night and a humid, mostly cloudy start to Wednesday. The cloud will thicken through the day, further pulses of heavy rain coming in, initially to Northern Ireland, then spreading into parts of southern Scotland. Some showers over England and Wales, and again some heavy ones, particularly later on. Much of the south and east of England, far northwest staying dry. Turning fresher here, as I mentioned, but quite warm and humid across England and Wales, mid-20s
likely through the afternoon. But that humidity may well spark some heavier downpours during the afternoon and evening, parts of northeast England and eastern Scotland, before again that all heads out into the North Sea, and something fresher and clearer arrives for most of us on Thursday morning. But notice the cloud sticks around across the southeast, and it will be a warm, humid night here with some further outbreaks of rain. Some welcome rain across East Anglia and the southeast that may linger actually for much of Thursday. Some question marks about exactly when that will clear through. Brighter skies elsewhere. For most, a sunnier, fresher day. There'll still be some showers across parts of the west in particular. But as I said, for most, we'll notice that fresher feel. That humidity drops once more, and temperatures will be back close to the average for late June. High teens in the north, low 20s in the south.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories.